In a small, forgotten village nestled among the Bulgarian mountains, where the biting cold seemed relentless and a somber mist descended every night, lived Elena with her 10-year-old son, Dario. They had moved there seeking a peaceful life, far from the city's noise, but what they found was far different from what they expected. In that region, ancient tales were told about the Eyes of the Night, an entity that, according to the elders, awoke during winter to hunt those who dared to defy the silence of the darkness. Dario, a curious and sensitive boy, paid little attention to local legends until he began to feel a strange presence in the house. It started with small noises in the dead of night, dragging footsteps in the attic, unintelligible whispers seemingly coming from the walls, and shadows dancing in the mirror's reflection. One night, he awoke with a start, feeling as if someone was sitting on the edge of his bed. He looked over and saw a pair of red eyes glowing like embers, fixating on him with terrifying intensity. Fear froze his spine, but before he could scream, the figure dissolved into a black mist that filled his room. The next day, he tried to tell his mother, but Elena, busy with her remote work as a medicinal plant researcher, dismissed the incident, attributing it to the boy's overactive imagination. However, things only worsened when the family cat mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind only a trail of dried blood on the kitchen doorstep. Dario then began to have horrific dreams, visions of a creature with sharp teeth, a body covered in scaly skin, and a laugh that echoed in the nearby caves. During these dreams, he felt his soul being pulled into a bottomless abyss, where darkness had no limits and pain was eternal. One of those nights, he woke to find his room enveloped in a thick black mist that seemed to suck all warmth from the air. He tried to call for his mother, but his voice failed in his throat as if something had blocked his will to speak. When he finally managed to emit a sound, he saw a pale, almost translucent hand emerge from the floor and grab his ankle with terrifying force. Terror overwhelmed him, and he struggled to break free until his mother's scream jolted him fully awake, sweating coldly and gasping, his heart pounding in his chest. Elena, frightened, realized something was wrong and decided to investigate the village's ancient stories. In a dusty local library book, she discovered that the Eyes of the Night were vengeful spirits of hunters who had died in an ancient tragedy, cursing the valley forever. The curse stated that the entity could enter people's dreams and steal their life force until they succumbed to madness or death. Determined to protect her son, Elena sought help from a village elder, a man known as Ivan, who claimed to possess ancestral knowledge of how to ward off darkness. He advised that the house needed to be purified with specific herbs, and that Dario should carry an amulet made of iron forged in an ancient furnace. The first few nights after the ritual were silent, but it didn't last long. One particularly cold morning, Elena awoke to the sound of breaking glass. She rushed to her son's room and found the window wide open, curtains swaying as if an invisible presence had passed through. On the floor were deep marks, like claws, and a trail of blood leading into the nearby forest. Dario was gone. Despair gripped the mother, who ran out into the darkness, calling for her boy. The trees seemed to close around her, while the wind howled unintelligible words. Suddenly, a scream cut through the night, chilling Elena's spine. She ran toward the sound and found Dario lying on the ground, with horrible marks on his neck, glazed eyes, and skin as pale as wax. She tried to wake him, but he was unconscious, and at that instant, she felt an overwhelming weight on her soul, as if darkness had permanently settled within him. From then on, nothing would ever be the same. What was awakening in that village was something ancient, a force that could not be controlled and that had cruel plans for the residents who dared to remain in that forgotten land. After what happened with Dario, Elena couldn't rest. She spent her nights by her son's side. He now seemed like a stranger. His eyes, once full of life, were empty, as if a part of him had been torn away forever. Still, he didn't die, remaining caught between the world of the living and the shadows. The village began to whisper. Other residents reported disappearances, agonizing screams coming from the forests, and figures darting through the streets under the pale moonlight. It was then that Ivan, the elder, appeared with a devastating revelation. The curse affected not only those who lived there, but anyone who dared to investigate too deeply. He recounted that many centuries ago, a group of hunters had pursued and massacred a misunderstood creature, a forest guardian spirit that punished invaders with unimaginable fury. The victims not only died, but their souls were condemned to wander, trapped between time and space, feeding the darkness that ran beneath the earth. Among the stories Elena heard, that of Marek, a young hunter from the neighboring village, was the most disturbing. He disappeared during a hunt, and when they found him days later, he was completely insane, muttering in an ancient language no one understood. His skin was covered in claw-like marks, and his disfigured eyes showed an agony no one could bear to look at. Marek tried to speak of the voices of the abyss and the call no one should answer, but his words were disjointed and laden with terror. One day, Elena decided to visit the old cabin in the heart of the forest, where, according to Ivan, the curse originated. There, among twisted trees and exposed roots, she found symbols carved into the stones and traces of ancient rituals. It was then that she heard a whisper coming from the ground, a call that seemed to penetrate her mind, promising answers in exchange for sacrifices. Frightened, she returned home, but felt something following her. During the night, the amulet Dario wore began to emit a faint, almost imperceptible light, as if fighting against the approaching darkness. It was at this moment that the haunting presence fully revealed itself. A tall, deformed shadow, with long arms extending like tentacles, appeared in their room. Its voice was a deep echo, a mix of laments and threats that made the air vibrate with a malevolent energy. Dario tried to resist, but the creature plunged its hands into his chest, and a horrible scream echoed through the house. Elena tried to intervene but was thrown against the wall with an invisible force. The darkness seemed to be winning. The next morning, the boy was conscious again, but completely changed. His voice, hoarse and distant, spoke things no one wanted to hear, premonitions of future tragedies and curses that would fall upon the entire village. The following days were a collective nightmare. Residents began to disappear without a trace. Bodies were found in deplorable states, as if they had been consumed from within. Nights brought an oppressive feeling that something greater, something from beyond, was about to awaken to destroy everything. And while Elena struggled to find a solution, an even more terrifying fact emerged. The creature tormenting her family was not the true threat, but merely a messenger from the abyss, a herald of darkness walking among the living to prepare the ground for something far worse. If you've been following along, you've realized these aren't just bedtime stories. They carry a weight, an energy that resonates in the shadows of the real world. If this kind of mystery fascinates you, why not subscribe to the channel? Here, we're not just telling stories, we want you to be a part of them. And speaking of which, tell me in the comments, what was the most terrifying moment of this account for you? Have you felt something similar? Share with us. Let's create a community where fear transforms into strength. The village seemed to have fallen into a heavy, almost sepulchral silence after the recent events. The once busy streets were empty, covered by a thick mist that seemed to absorb even the most subtle sounds. Elena, exhausted and with a heavy heart, knew she had to act, but to do so, she would have to face what many feared to mention. She gathered with Ivan and the few other residents who had not yet succumbed to fear, and together they decided to find a way to break the curse. Ivan then revealed an ancient manuscript, a relic that spoke of the Key of Erebus, a lost artifact said to have the power to trap the guardian spirit forever. The problem? It was buried in a forgotten temple, deep within an even darker forest, hundreds of kilometers away. As Elena prepared for this journey, the village continued to be consumed by darkness. One of the residents, Lucas, an artisan known for his metalwork skills, mysteriously disappeared. His body was found days later, hanging from a tree with strange marks, as if he had been enslaved by invisible claws. The horror of the scene was heightened by the fact that his eyes were completely black, as if the light had been sucked away from his soul. Elena knew time was her enemy. With Ivan's help, she set off for the temple, facing not only the natural dangers of the forest, but also the constant feeling of being watched. During the journey, terrifying tales surfaced in her mind, the story of a woman named Varya, who had once tried to summon the guardian spirit for power, but was destroyed by her own ambition. Her body was never found, but it is said that her spirit still wanders today among the trees, condemned to protect the key's secret. Upon arriving at the temple, covered in moss and symbols that seemed to pulsate with a life of their own, Elena felt the air pressure change, as if she were entering a world between worlds. Inside, the darkness was almost palpable, and muffled sounds echoed through the stone walls, sounds that seemed like whispers of lost souls. In one of the chambers, she found the key, an artifact of black metal, studded with ancient symbols, and pulsating with a cold, sharp energy. The moment she touched it, an immense presence was felt, a silent scream that seemed to come from the very fabric of the universe. Elena felt the weight of responsibility crushing her chest, but she knew she couldn't retreat. Meanwhile, in the village, the situation worsened. The darkness manifested physically. Houses were consumed by a viscous shadow, and those who tried to flee found their bodies mutilated in unimaginable ways, as if the darkness had a will of its own to destroy. A young man named Marek, known for his curiosity and courage, tried to help Elena from a distance, but ended up disappearing without a trace. The village was trapped in a nightmare, and it seemed that only a miracle, or an extreme sacrifice, could save those who still breathed. You, who are experiencing this somber atmosphere, have you ever stopped to think about what you would do if you were in Elena's place? How far would you go to save those you love? Share your answer in the comments. It's incredible to see how everyone faces fear and courage in such different ways. Oh, and if you haven't joined our community yet, take the opportunity to subscribe. Here, every story is a door to the unknown, and your voice makes all the difference. Elena held the key of Erebus tightly, feeling its weight not just physically, but spiritually, as if she held the destiny of that cursed village in her hands. In the temple, the atmosphere seemed alive, breathing with her, pulsating with an ancient and threatening energy. The walls, covered in indecipherable inscriptions, seemed to contort, revealing distorted images of macabre scenes, human figures swallowed by shadows that looked like demonic arms, whispers of betrayals, forgotten pacts, and eternal revenges. Elena knew the challenge was far from over. Upon returning to the village, accompanied by Ivan and the few other survivors, they quickly realized that what awaited them was far worse than anyone could imagine. The darkness was not just a supernatural phenomenon. It possessed its own will, and fed on the fear, pain, and anguish of those who still resisted. Amidst this apocalyptic scenario, an obscure mystery came to light. Marek, the disappeared young man, was not dead. He had been captured by the shadows, transformed into a grotesque creature, a hybrid of man and monster, trapped between two worlds. Marek returned to haunt the village, his empty eyes reflecting the void of the souls that had been consumed. His presence caused terror, but also offered clues, fragments of memories and murmurs that could be the key to breaking the curse. Elena, desperate, sought to decipher these clues, even knowing it would lead her down even darker paths. She discovered that the origin of the curse was linked to an ancient pact made by the village's ancestors with an entity that promised prosperity in exchange for innocent souls. The entity, known as the Guardian of Shadows, demanded periodic sacrifices to maintain its power and prevent its wrath from falling upon humanity. Each time the village refused the sacrifice, the darkness increased, punishing the survivors with indescribable horrors. Ivan, who had seemed a steadfast ally until then, revealed his true role. He was a direct descendant of that pact and secretly was trying to protect the entity to preserve his family legacy. The shock of the betrayal left Elena almost powerless, but she understood she needed to act fast. A final confrontation was inevitable. Nights became a constant nightmare, with screams echoing in empty houses and shadows extending like tentacles in search of prey. The village was on the verge of complete destruction, Amidst this chaos, Elena found an ancient ritual hidden in the manuscript, a last chance to trap the Guardian of Shadows forever. But the price would be too high. Someone would have to sacrifice themselves to seal the entity's power. The tension reached its limit. Who would have the courage to accept this mission? Who would have the strength to face the darkness and not succumb? The entire village seemed to await this answer, knowing that everyone's fate depended on it. Now, I want to ask you, who are following this story? What sacrifice do you think is worth making to save everything you love? Have you ever felt that sometimes our choices have such great consequences that they change lives forever? Tell me in the comments. Your perspective makes this conversation even deeper and more real. And if you're enjoying this immersion into the unknown, how about strengthening our journey? Subscribe to the channel to not miss any chapter of this intense and engaging saga, because here, every story is an invitation to face your own fears. Ready for the conclusion? The silence in the village was suffocating, as if even the shadows hesitated before advancing. Elena, with the key in one hand and the manuscript in the other, knew the time for the ritual had come. The stars faded behind the black clouds, and a cold wind seemed to whisper the names of those already consumed by darkness. Ivan, now completely surrendered to the Guardian of Shadows, appeared before her with a grim smile, his eyes glowing with a fire not of this world. The confrontation was inevitable. Words laden with ancient curses and broken promises flew through the air until the struggle took physical form, a clash between light and darkness, between redemption and destruction. Elena felt every blow as if she carried not only her body but the soul of the entire village. But the ritual had to be performed. With her last ounces of strength, she began to recite the forbidden words, those no one had dared to utter for centuries, while Ivan advanced to stop her. The key in her hand began to glow with an intense light, blinding even the densest shadows. When the final moment arrived, Elena made the decision that would change everything. She offered herself as a sacrifice. She knew her fate was sealed, but she also knew her act could free everyone else from the curse. With a scream that mingled pain and hope, she plunged the key into the central stone of the temple. The light exploded, engulfing everything, consuming the Guardian of Shadows in a dazzling brilliance that seemed to disintegrate time itself. The village then silently breathed a sigh of relief. The shadows dissipated, leaving behind only the vestiges of the tragedy. Survivors emerged from the ruins, carrying the weight of their losses, but also the promise of a new beginning. However, the legend of Elena and her Maiko courage remained forever etched in the hearts of those who understood that, sometimes, true terror lies not only in supernatural forces, but in the human capacity to face the unknown and make choices no one else would dare to make. And you, have you ever felt your own life intersect with forces beyond comprehension? That tough decisions had to be made, and that fear was a constant companion. I want to hear your stories. Share your experiences and reflections with our community. If this video moved you, if you learned something about courage, fear, or survival, leave your comment. Your voice is essential to keeping this space alive and full of energy. And of course, if you're not yet part of our family, subscribe to the channel in a very special way, not just to receive videos, but to be together with people who, like you, are not afraid to explore the darker and most fascinating side of existence. Thank you for being here until the end. This journey doesn't end here, because fear and courage walk side by side, always ready for the next story.